y'all, welcome back. I'm Mama Dr. Jones, a board-certified OBGYN and mom to four, and today's topic is so important. Today, I have the opportunity to talk to Jamie Dodger, or Jamie Rains, a YouTuber and all-around wonderful person that I've been looking forward to collaborating with for a long time. We're gonna ask him some really important questions about his healthcare as a trans individual and what he thinks we can do as a medical community and as the general public to improve the healthcare that trans people get, especially when it comes to things like going to the gynecologist. So we are here with Jamie Dodger, Jamie from YouTube. He has a wonderful YouTube channel. If you haven't checked it out, I will link it in the description box below. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. You're too nice. That was a very nice introduction.
Well, I believe every bit of it, and I've been a fan of your YouTube channel since I found it. So I appreciate what you do. It's humorous. It brings really important knowledge to a topic that I think is sometimes kind of left out. And so that's actually my first question for you is, do you ever feel like the discourse around trans people is completely without the input of people in the community?
I feel like people have all these conversations around trans people, trans rights, and like even trans bodies without properly discussing with the trans community and trans people themselves. And like sometimes you can read books and think, oh, they've talked about trans things and not talked about trans people, or and like even people who mean well and think they're trans allies and they're sticking up for the trans community, they're kind of speaking in a way that a trans person might not necessarily, and they have opinions on a topic that a trans person might not share. Like they might say something's transphobic and then the trans community is like, it's not, it's okay, and then vice versa. So I definitely think trans people can be a little bit forgotten.
The reason I asked you that is I just yesterday was watching about Adele making a statement. Did you see this? So she made a statement for the community who doesn't know, watching that, you know, she was very proud to be a woman who is a wonderful singer and acknowledged, and she was at a gender neutral awards show. And so people took this and ran with it, and all the headlines said that people were calling her a TERF and all of these things. But when people started looking into it, it seemed as though there were no trans people who were actually that bothered by what she had to say. So what's your thoughts on that?
Literally just recorded a video about that today.
Perfect. Y'all go watch this video.
The only ones that I could actually see that were of people genuinely doing any kind of call out on Adele were more questioning how her words could be interpreted and saying maybe this could have been interpreted in a kind of transphobic way. But I couldn't actually see if the people saying that were trans themselves. Newspapers ran with transphobes joking that, like, pretending to be a trans person calling Adele out for being transphobic. And that's where the headlines came from. It's like, I've not talked to any trans person that's actually upset by it. I do not think she was transphobic in any way, and I don't think any trans person really does, so it's very confusing.
That's like the whole point, right? Is like you're allowed to be proud of who you are.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's like the category for the award was gender neutral, but it doesn't mean that the recipient needs to remain gender neutral in their acknowledgement of themselves or how they discuss about like their own involvement in the music industry. The category's neutral. Adele acknowledged that and said she understood why, but she, as a woman and someone who's very like proud to be a woman, she is allowed to express that.
Yeah.
And she should be proud of that because she's really like be an incredible role model for other women in the music industry. And I think she should celebrate that.
I, sometimes get feedback from a very small minority of people who will say they don't like that I use gender neutral language in the gynecology space, and how they will bring almost like my user handle, Mama Dr. Jones, into it and say, well, you're calling yourself a mom. Well, yeah, like that's my identity. And I think it's important that we support everybody's identity and recognize when we're speaking to large groups of people, they don't all share the same identity.
Yeah, I think you do such a wonderful job of using gender neutral language. Like I love seeing a doctor out there speaking about like people and trans people in the way that you do. I think it's fantastic. I think something people that really miss about inclusive language is we use the inclusive language on like the top level when we don't know who we're addressing, and we're addressing a group of people who can have this experience. As soon as you get into the individuals and you're talking to people on a one-to-one basis or anything, and you know people's gender, you can use gendered language.
Exactly.
Just because we say pregnant people doesn't mean that like a cis woman coming in is going to be referred to as a pregnant person. We're just using it like at this level.
And that seems to be everybody's, main argument when they want to talk about it online. And I always just find it to be crazy because I would never walk in, I would say 99.9% of the people I've taken care of in person identify as women. And I've never called any of them anything but a woman, if that's what they go by. And so I find it crazy because exactly like you said, it's like a top-down thing. When I'm speaking to, hundreds of thousands of people in a video, there's no way all of them will have the same identity. And that's really important because healthcare access can be more difficult for people who experience dysphoria when they're listening to somebody talk about something that doesn't feel like it applies to them with the language, but it applies to them physically.
No, I think that's so important to acknowledge. Yeah.
So I'm interested in your journey because I would imagine it wasn't an easy decision, or maybe it was, to start a YouTube channel and talk so openly about your journey. You've been online, I think, from what I've seen, for a long time through your transition.
Yeah.
So how did you come to that conclusion, and have you ever felt like that was not the right decision?
Oof. Okay, so where my channel got and what I do with it now is a complete accident and not something I set out to do. So it was like there were many moments where it was quite scary, and like I had many conversations with my partner Shaba when things were growing, and it was like, is this like, do we want this? Because it's opening yourself up to like a lot of criticism and hate and all of that stuff. Because my channel originally started off for two reasons. One was like, I saw other trans people on YouTube, and that is what really helped me so much to accept myself and know what to do going forward, and just like even helped me explain it to loved ones as well, because I'm hearing their words and I feel like I've got people to relate to and how they came out to people. But also as a way to document my personal transition. So I was like, I'm going to make some videos. I'll talk about my experience. It'll be like an archive for me to look back on. And maybe I'll reach a few like trans people in the UK, because it was all American based back then. There wasn't much information about how to transition in the UK. And then it just grew. And I remember getting 100 views on my first video. And I was like, oh my God, I need to take it down. I cannot handle this level of views. And then it just kind of went from there, and it was something I fell in love with doing and wanted to continue. But it's definitely had its negatives in terms of like opening yourself up to hate and criticism and stuff.
Do you feel like the hate and criticism stays online, or have you, obviously in general in the trans community, there's hate and criticism offline, but do you feel like there's any overlap there just from being a public figure or being recognized when you're out and about?
I've never had anything personally to me in like that's offline, but I guess it's kind of a worry in the back of my head sometimes. Like, just what if someone recognizes me and doesn't like me? Shaba has had somebody like find her old work number and call her and just not be very nice. So there has been an instant of it like going into real life, but not for me. For Shaba, and that was really like scary and uncomfortable when that was happening.
I'm sorry, that's terrible. And I imagine, she seems so supportive and just like a lovely person, and I can't imagine why someone would feel the need to harass someone.
I don't know. It's very confusing.
When I started hearing from the trans community, and in my comments and stuff, was them encouraging me to please consider using more gender neutral language, and my knee-jerk reaction was like, why is that even needed, And then I started looking into it more and finding, tons of published literature on the importance of trans inclusion in healthcare providers and how that reduces the incidence of suicidality in the trans community, and having an accepting healthcare provider changes health outcomes. And I thought, well, I literally can't ignore this now. I'm glad that you're out there and putting yourself out there, even though you know that can happen, because you're exactly right. Being present and being visible is so important, and it's obviously made a huge difference in your coming out story. You tweeted a while back discussing fertility. Are you comfortable talking about your fertility journey and what I presume to be an intended journey to parenthood at some point?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer some questions on that. It'll probably be quite vague because we've not like nothing's set in stone, but yeah, I'm happy to talk about it.
So you're considering doing something, having a baby at some point, I presume? Okay, well, I love that. That's very exciting. I can't wait to make a video about it when you finally do. So what do you know so far, or what do you want people to know about that journey with a couple like you and Shava, and how that's different than the average person?
The main thing that we've realized in just some kind of preliminary looking into it is we have no idea where we stand in terms of like fertility clinics in the UK, like how they would categorize us as a couple. That's the main thing right now, that we're like, this is really confusing and there's no information out there. Cisgender heterosexual couples, there's like a protocol for like, you have to be trying for this long, and if you're still not getting pregnant, then you get this much free like IVF treatment on the NHS and things like that. For LGBT plus couples, which is typically only ever described as like kind of like gay men couples or like lesbian couples, they can't say like, well, you need to go off and try, and if it doesn't work, then come back to us. And I believe that like some areas in the UK will offer kind of like funding for treatment, but then many others won't, and it all depends on where you live as to whether you get any kind of like free IVF treatment as a gay couple in the UK. But as a trans man and a cis woman, where we are like a straight couple and a man and a woman, but I am trans, so therefore fall under the umbrella of LGBT+, we have no idea how we would be considered as a couple. Whether they class us as like technically like a same-sex couple, which personally makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, but whether that would be our categorization, or if they would just say, no, you're like a infertile heterosexual couple, that's how we'll treat you. That's the main like initial barrier we've come up against. There's just nothing out there.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because when you first asked the question, I thought, well, it doesn't matter, like just make an appointment, go talk to somebody. But now that you're bringing in like the socialized healthcare and paying for IVF, which now that I'm living in New Zealand, I understand a little bit more than I did when I was living in the States, because in the States it's all just out of pocket. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah. The only reason you would ever consider a trans person in your setup like to be a same-sex couple would only be if both people still had a uterus and you needed to have a discussion about who's going to actually carry the pregnancy. And so that would make sense. And I don't know your specific situation, but I presume that you don't fall into that category.
No, I would not carry.
I think that would, you're right, fall more like a heterosexual couple with a male infertility factor. And in what you're saying is that those couples have to try on their own for a period of time before they fall under the category of being paid for. So yeah, that makes complete sense now why you're like, this doesn't make sense. Like, obviously we shouldn't try on our own for a period of time, but also we don't fit into the section of like both of us would be willing or want to carry. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So hopefully you can find some answers, or at least pretend you've been trying and get in and talk to an actual doctor. You're like, well, we've been trying and it's not happening. I don't know why.
No clue. It's been 10 years. That's the first hurdle. We're just going to have to speak to some people when we're ready and see where it goes. Yeah.
Well, being ready for parenthood is a journey in and of itself. So I wish you the best of luck with that. I have 4 kids. The oldest are 9, and I'm still not sure I'm ready for parenthood. So... And the last question I have for you is, what do you want the general medical community, because I have quite a few people who are doctors or nurses or just in healthcare in some capacity watching my channel, what do you wish that they knew about making their practice more trans-inclusive? Because as we know, just because you don't think you have trans patients doesn't mean you don't, especially outside of, what I do, where my patients would necessarily be telling me that. What can these practices do to make sure they're being more inclusive to patients?
I think a massive thing is education. So like, I feel like I've been quite fortunate for a trans person in terms of how I've been treated within healthcare situations. But whenever I pursue anything healthcare related to my assigned sex, I've never had people just know how to talk to me or know what to do. And I've had very confused people where I have to kind of explain things in depth, or they have to like call somebody else to ask what they should be doing with me, basically treating me as if I'm very, very confusing. And I just think like learning a little bit and recognizing that people can be trans, and like what it means to be a trans person in terms of like healthcare needs and everything, that would go such a long way to helping, because it's just realizing that you might have somebody who you would automatically assume was like a cisgender man come into a clinic and require a smear test because they're actually a trans man. And that is something that can happen. And I just think if people are aware of that and know then how to talk to that trans man, that would help so much, because it's very off-putting to try and pursue any kind of healthcare needs in certain areas, because it's like, well, how are people going to treat me? Because no experience so far has been positive. It's all just been like neutral to uncomfortable.
That's a really good point. And it's so often, it doesn't matter how inclusive and aware the person, the healthcare provider is, which there's a huge issue with that as well. We don't get a pass. There's definitely plenty of very transphobic outwardly, or just not understanding people who are doctors or nurses or whatever. But the education to the front desk staff or the people answering the phone and things like that seems like it probably is, that's your first point of contact. So that's going to guide, how you feel about everything in general. So that's a really good point. Do you ever feel like it prevented, you said you've had a generally okay experience, but do you ever feel like it prevented you or delayed the time that you took to get care that you needed?
I've had to chase certain care needs quite a bit. I'm like, so I don't know how it works in other countries, but in the UK, like cisgender women will receive a smear test kind of, you need to come and get one when they hit 25. And then at like every 2 years, I think, or 3 years, I don't receive any of that. And so like my reminders are from my partner. So it's kind of, because I see what she gets and we're roughly the same age. So it's like, oh, okay. But it's not something I've actually gone and got done because I'm too nervous to go to just like a general doctor or like a general nurse and be like, hello, I need this done. And then I just think I'm just worried. Like it's just the fear, and it's just the knowing that there are transphobic people out there, but then even if they're very nice, they probably won't really know what's going on or understand what to do. I've been wanting to go to an LGBT plus specific clinic to get something, like to get checks done, but then kind of COVID delayed that.
Yeah, COVID has delayed a lot of people's healthcare. You make a really great point. A large majority of trans men do need smears, and that is something that is incredibly important. Your life can depend on that. In the UK and here, general practitioners tend to do the smear test. In the US, it's gynecologists. So I can go around and say like, you're welcome in my practice in the States, but here I don't have any control over it. I think that's really important. And there's not a currently reliable way to find people that will be sensitive to making sure that you are not feeling dysphoric so much so that you can't even get your healthcare done. And not everybody obviously feels dysphoric about doctor's visits, but some people do. Right now, it seems like it's just done mainly through like discussions within the community and word of mouth. But there's a real need for some kind of certification program that is even just like, it could even just be a couple of hours of learning about inclusive language and how to make your practice more inclusive, from small things such as your paperwork saying, what is your gender? Is it the same or different than the sex you were assigned at birth? Like something that simple, a question that simple is enough to trigger in a trans person's mind, I'm safe here. I can get the healthcare I need here.
Someone we know qualified to be a doctor in the UK recently, and she said there was absolutely zero mention of trans people in like the entire...
I had none.
Qualification, like process of becoming a doctor. And it's like she was asking me some questions because we're quite close, and she asked if that was okay, and I said, yeah, that's fine, you can ask me questions. And she just had no idea about anything to do with what kind of healthcare needs I might have as a trans man, or the healthcare needs that a trans woman might have, or a non-binary person depending on their assigned sex. That made me more nervous because like, oh, like literally every single doctor coming through is, unless they're doing it on their own, is having zero education or like trans-inclusive kind of teaching going on.
Yeah, and I would say that's universal. I had also none in med school, none in gynecology training. Honestly, if I hadn't started a YouTube channel, I probably would have never even sought that out because I wouldn't have recognized how important it was. So that's a really great point. It's been a while since I trained, so hopefully that's something that's in the process of changing as there's more trans visibility and importance. And I see that too. I was trying to cut this short, but I'm sure the people will love to listen. But I see this too when there's discussions on Twitter and, the transphobic TERF people come out screaming. And I'll say, you're welcome in my clinic, man, woman, NB, I don't care. I will see you if you have the parts that I need to take care of for you. And people get angry and they say like, well, a trans woman doesn't need a pap smear. You're wasting resources. And it's almost like trans men just get completely forgotten in this whole discussion. I'm like, okay, but I'm rarely talking to the trans women when I'm talking about gynecology. And this is so, I feel like trans women become so othered and so fetishized that you can't even have a discussion that involves trans men because people just are too up in arms to even like bring it to the forefront of their brain. Do you feel like that happens to you as well?
I'd say people forget that trans men exist to the point where if I say I'm trans, a lot of people will be like, you'll never be a real woman. I was like, they're like, you'll always be a man.
Thank you.
I'm like, thank you.
You made me feel great.
You validated me, yeah. But
my God.
It's almost like tiny violin, because the flip side of that is trans women get so much hate, so much transphobia. It's vile, and they're kind of at the forefront of that. Taking a step back, there's trans men who don't face as much direct hate, but then are very forgotten about. And it does feel like a little kind of that, because it's obviously being forgotten about could be comparatively like a more comfortable situation than receiving like a lot of hate and being the attention of media headlines and all of this like horrible transphobia that is directed just towards trans women. I think certainly when it comes to things like healthcare in particular, because trans men are forgotten, it kind of highlights that forgottenness, which is not a word, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I mean, but you're exactly right, because there are so many healthcare issues that are unique to people who are assigned female at birth. And those unique health issues, which are my specialty, are so important for everyone, which is why I feel so passionate about this, And again, I admittedly have only become passionate about that because the onus of educating me went to the trans community, who came into my comments and told me why it was important, that should never be the case. It should never be that a community which is already marginalized, which is having worse health outcomes because of that marginalization, the responsibility is put on them to educate the general public. So some people will say like, oh, you're virtue signaling, you just talk about this all the time. And my speak to that is, no, I feel like it is my job, because the trans community had to educate me on this, that I will educate other people in the medical community. And I hope that people see that and listen to that, because it's not fair for someone who's already going through that to have to be the one educating people about it.
Yeah, we need way more doctors like you, seriously.
Well, I can't even take credit for it, because I didn't just become this way because I am just a wonderful person. I became this way because my initial reaction was to think that this is a crazy thing to use neutral language in a field that's very traditionally gendered. But for some reason, I looked into it and then I understood. So yeah, I hope that other people take note of that. And thank you to the trans person who made that very first comment and did it kindly enough that I didn't get so reactionary and so offended that I was being criticized. They did it in a way that allowed me to give some space in my brain to think about it. So yeah, I mean, I can't take any credit for it. It is a trans community who has helped with that. So anyway, all right, we're going to go film a more fun video on your channel. This was very good, and I hope very educational to everybody. So if you're watching this and you are done with this video, now go over to Jamie's channel. I will link it in the description box below, and we'll do something way more fun over there. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here today, y'all. If you haven't already, jump over to Jamie's channel, which is linked in the description box below, and watch our video together going through bad medical takes from Twitter. Give him a subscribe. If you're not subscribed here, we'd love to have you. I will see you next Monday.